Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. Thank you for joining today's episode. We're on a mission to share e-commerce logistics insights, trends, successes, and challenges from the leaders and innovators in our space.
I would argue that mid-market companies need to look at the first mile of their supply chain and assess where is the most manual work being done, what risk is that creating, and is there software that I can implement to automate those manual tasks to free up my buyers so they can be more strategic, and two, to minimize the risk in my supply chain so I'm not worrying about somebody going in and miskeying something.
Welcome to eCom Logistics Podcast. For this episode, we welcome Sarah Scudder, based in beautiful Austin, Texas. Sarah brings over a decade of experience growing and scaling supply chain organizations, and last year joined SourceDay as CMO. Sarah, we are so grateful to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. So this is my first Austin summer and has not been less than triple digits for the last 2 months. So I made the mistake of trying to go running outside on Friday and couldn't finish. I am not used to running when it's 100 plus, nor am I used to the humidity. So love Austin, love the people, but the heat is definitely something I'm not used to.
I was actually doing some research on you and following your Twitter thread. And in there, like one of the posts was like, just remember not to go out between 11 a.m. and November 2nd. Like it's 104 outside. So
you learn very quickly to work out indoors here. And we'll see. I hear it's pretty warm until October. So I'm bracing myself.
All right. And where did you move from to Austin?
So I was born and raised in California, girl, for 38 years. I moved to Austin at the end of last year and became a Texas resident. So I'm used to San Francisco Bay Area weather where it cools down at night. It's cool a lot of time throughout the year, and we don't have humidity.
Exactly.
That's a big change. That is a big change, Sarah. Listen, we're super excited to have you on, and certainly with all things going on in the economy and supply chain issues continuing, maybe they're not what they were a couple years ago. They continue to haunt us and challenge us. So before we get into that, maybe could you share with the listeners a little bit about your story and your background?
Yeah, so I was planning to go into the fashion industry. I did runway modeling in high school. I am 6 foot tall, and it just was my calling given my height. And I was wanting to actually go into the production side of the industry. So my plans were to graduate, move to SoCal, New York, or somewhere in Europe, work for a runway production company, and then eventually start my own. So I went to school at Sonoma State University, which is a very tiny, almost like a private school, but not college, in wine country. So in Sonoma County, where some of the most amazing wine in the world is brewed and created. And there was not really a fashion major. That wasn't really an option. So I decided I would double major in business and economics. And I did an emphasis in marketing, decided to pick up a minor in American multicultural studies. So I was planning to get out in 4 years, do whatever I could locally in fashion. Again, there wasn't a lot since it was in the middle of wine country. Everything was really focused around that, and then move away. My senior year of college, I had just finished my presidency for my sorority, Alpha Gamma Delta, and I was co-chairing the largest fundraising event of the year for our university. It was called Lip Jam. It's an organization where all the sororities and fraternities practice for months their lip sync routines. Some guys come in and bust a move, and women have their acts all planned out. So it's kind of fun. But all the money goes to diabetes research. And so I decided as my last hurrah for my sorority before I graduated, I would co-chair and put on that event. And keep in mind, I had 2 majors, a minor. I had a pretty demanding school load, and I was very involved in just about every leadership position that you could be on campus. And when I started putting the event together, I realized there was a lot of things that I needed to procure. I needed to buy media. I needed to buy print. I needed to buy promo. I needed to buy apparel. This was all something I didn't know how to do, nor did I have the bandwidth or time. So I found a local company that sourced marketing related materials. And I hired them, and they sourced and procured everything for the event. When our list of performance was over, they came to me and said, "Hey, Sarah, we'd really like to hire you. We want younger people in our organization. We'd like to set up an internship program. And we think you'd be a great fit since we've worked so closely with you for your event for the last couple months." Immediately, I thought, I have no idea what sourcing and procurement even is. It sounds boring, not fun and sexy, completely different than fashion. But I decided to spend a little more time meeting with their team. And one of the things I realized is that I potentially someday either wanted to have my own business, or I was someone who I think would really like working in startups. So I actually decided to take the job. I started a week after I graduated from college, and I spent my first 12 months actually studying and researching the market and pitching the CEO and founder to pivot the business model from a more product-focused company to a technology-focused company. Luckily, I was convincing. I had done my research, and so I helped really change the company into a supply chain software organization that sold a solution that helped companies procure all things marketing related. I stayed there for several years, and we were acquired by a much larger organization that was based in New York. They had 3 East Coast offices, and they were looking to expand in the US, and we were a nice tuck-in. We had 2 offices and helped them really with their West Coast expansion. So I stayed on there for a few years. I became the Chief Growth Officer, and my job was really to focus on getting our brand and getting our message in front of the right people. And at this time, we were really focused on selling into people in what is now becoming more common as a position called marketing procurement. So this is an individual that's a hybrid sourcing and marketing type individual. Oftentimes they'll report into both the marketing and procurement organizations. They work with marketing to help them source and procure everything they need to execute on their brand and on their mission. Then I was given an opportunity to join another supply chain tech startup, also in the marketing procurement space. And in that role, I was actually tasked with overseeing sales and marketing. And one of the things that I had quickly been learning throughout my career is that I really had a passion for marketing. And even when I was doing sales, it was really marketing focused and marketing driven. And the reason why I love marketing so much is that I think it can have a significant impact on a company's growth if done correctly. I also think a lot of companies have really bad marketing or don't know how to do marketing at all, or they spend a lot of money on it, and the money, in my opinion, is wasted. So I also saw a huge opportunity to become a demand gen, dark social focused marketer in a very kind of older school supply chain procurement space. So I decided in last year that I really wanted to pursue and go the marketing route. And then I was approached by the founder and CEO of SourceDay. They were looking for a chief marketing officer, loved the company, loved the product, and decided I could add tremendous value to the organization by really creating and building out a demand generation department. So I packed up my 2 bags. I don't have kids. I don't have pets. My boyfriend's still in Danville. I moved to Austin on October 25th, and I walked to the office on October 26th. And here I am 9 months later.
That's awesome, Sarah.
That is amazing.
That is awesome.
That is
and
amazing.
I think
that too.
Go ahead and nod.
Yeah, it's a inspiring story, how you moved through your career, as well as stepping into coming from that procurement side to getting into using the dark social strategies, demand generation to get into a startup that's very in the center of supply chain. And the fact of the matter, from our perspective, one of the reasons that I was excited to talk about this with you is we use the word supply chain very loosely. Like, we at Fulfillment IQ also use the term supply chain. And in a lot of cases, we are hyper focused on the outbound supply chain, right? Our work starts after the purchase order arrives at a warehouse and how the product gets to the consumer. But there is this big dark side, and that's where most of the challenges, of course, there were challenges on the outbound supply chain, but a lot of challenges that we saw over the last couple of years in the inbound supply chain side, right? There's the logjam with the shipping routes, container availability, name it all, the prices for the containers themselves, trade war challenges, just a multitude of things that caused all the disruption. And we don't talk about it enough. To me, I'm excited about talking about that. And you're pretty much dead center of that entire situation, specifically on the inbound logistics side of things. Looking forward to these conversations.
Yeah, and what you're really describing is what we coin here at SourceDay is what I call the first mile of supply chain. So the supply chain can be broken into a few different components, but two of the major ones are the first mile and the last mile. And what you described your company does, and you play in the last mile where you're focused on helping people get their product to the end customer. And during COVID, in particular, companies have really pivoted and spent a lot of time and resources focusing on that last mile, right? Once your product gets on the boat, you have no idea, and you may see it in 6 or 12 months. But there's also a huge opportunities for companies to invest time and resources in the first mile, so their inbound parts and materials and items are arriving on time, so manufacturing plants can stay on schedule to actually have product to ship out to the end customer.
Yeah, no, completely. Just one of the things I got to call out is from a supply chain standpoint, again, it's like everyone has their own definition. And so from our vantage point, when we talk about the distribution network, the first mile is actually once the product leaves the warehouse. Let's talk about a parcel that's getting shipped to a merchant or to an end consumer. It's when it leaves is the first mile. The middle mile is where the sortation happens. And the last mile is like that truck that comes to your house. And when you look at the broader supply chain perspective, yes, the first mile is the procurement. And yeah, the focus has been very much on the last mile and a lot of complaining on the first mile of the supply chain. But no one really knows how to go about solving for it, or what can they do to weather this storm. The storms come in and tapered down a little bit and picked up a little bit more. And I was just at a port a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to the personnel at the port, and I'm like, okay, what do you guys think? And they're like, not until the end of next year, we are still going to see these problems, right? Like, so the problems are going to continue. This might be the most opportune time to talk about what can, and specifically some of our audience, which is the mid-market. What can they do? What can the mid-market merchant do to weather the storm, right? Do you have any opinions on that or any advice for our listeners?
Yeah, so I think it's important to start by defining what do when I say the first mile. So if I look at a hydro flask water bottle, any parts or materials that goes into this bottle, into the end product that's actually being sold, is considered direct spend. It's directly going into the product. And then the first mile is Hydro Flask trying to make sure that they get all the parts and materials and components they need from their supplier base into their manufacturing facility on time, so they can make sure their production schedule for their water bottles stays on track, so they can fulfill retail and direct customer orders. So the first mile of the supply chain is getting those parts and materials and working with your suppliers to get what you need on time, and I should note, in full. Very important distinction. So I think the world in which buyers are working with suppliers has completely changed in the last 3 years, and it's going to continue to become even more collaborative. There used to be, when I would work with buyers years ago, I felt that there was this I versus them mentality. The buyers coming in and trying to squeeze every nickel, every dime out of the supplier, wasn't necessarily treating the supplier well. It was just doing everything they can to pinch that supplier. Now it's completely different, where I would argue that your supplier is the most important stakeholder at your entire company. And the reason for that is companies cannot get supply now. So you're wanting to get certain parts and materials. If you are not a customer of choice, meaning a supplier likes working with you and has prioritized you as a customer, you are not potentially going to get any product at all, or you won't get all of your product, or it won't come on time. So supplier collaboration is absolutely essential and probably the most important thing you can do right now to manage the first mile of your supply chain. The second thing I would argue is automating manual work. So the buyers that we work with get hundreds or thousands of emails every single day from their suppliers with purchase order changes. What do I mean by that? Let's say I issue a purchase order to a supplier, and then there's a price change, a quantity change, a delivery date change. Maybe I can't fulfill the full order, but I can fill a partial, or maybe I can't ship the order from my New York warehouse, but I can ship it from my New Jersey warehouse. The supplier will then go into an email, notify the buyer, and then you've got all this back and forth between the buyer and the supplier about some basic purchase order changes. Once all that back and forth is done, the buyer is often putting things manually into a spreadsheet, and then the buyer is going back into the ERP system to make those changes so the purchase order is updated. Now, why am I explaining this long, drawn-out, exaggerated process? Because this is how many mid-market companies manage the first mile of their supply chain. It's fax, email, Post-it notes, spreadsheets. So that is really wrought for risk. Risk one, because you may miss an email. If I was getting hundreds of emails a day or a week from suppliers, no matter how thorough I am, I can guarantee you that I'm going to miss an email. That one missed email could have been a supplier notifying me that they couldn't fulfill the full order. Did I want a partial? If I didn't hear back, they weren't going to fulfill it. That missed fulfill for those 5-cent parts could have just shut down my production line for 2 full weeks, having significant revenue impact to my company. So I would argue that mid-market companies need to look at the first mile of their supply chain and assess where is the most manual work being done, what risk is that creating, and is there software that I can implement to automate those manual tasks to free up my buyers so they can be more strategic, and 2, to minimize the risk in my supply chain so I'm not worrying about somebody going in and miskeying something. I was actually on a call this morning with someone who runs supply chain for a pretty large food manufacturer. They have a multi-billion-dollar spend. And she was telling me a story about how someone went back into their ERP, accidentally miskeyed something, and it cost them $70,000.
That hurts big time.
That's gotta hurt. Yeah.
So I think, Sarah, I love everything you just talked about. And maybe to take it just one step backwards, if Ninad and Dan are selling t-shirts and we're looking to get those sourced overseas, and you talked about the importance, and I love that you brought this up, the importance of being strategic, right? Having strategic partnerships, because you're right. In the past, I think once you heard the word procurement, in the past, you just said, oh my gosh, I'm getting squeezed, long RFP process, head down, oh my gosh, right.
With you.
The percent of this closing is like less than 10% but now as you've stated, it's switched, right? So it's all about strategic. It's all about availability of goods. So for someone in the mid-market that's going out there today and wants to secure the raw materials to make their t-shirts, how does someone in the mid-market become a strategic partner? What could they do to build that type of relationship with potential vendors overseas?
So I think there's three things. The first, which is really important, and I probably should have mentioned it earlier, is you should never rely on one supplier. I highly discourage single sourcing. So single sourcing was very popular, and organizations would rely on one or two suppliers for the major components, parts, and materials for products. And if something happens to that supplier, you're literally shut down. And because of COVID and so much disruption and all the things happening globally, like the climate change and war, you absolutely need to have multiple suppliers for every single item that you source. So going back to that t-shirt example, if I'm sourcing raw materials, one of the first things I'm going to do is make sure I have at least two suppliers in different regions of the world for every single item that I'm sourcing. So location is also really important. If something shuts down in China, if you have three suppliers all within a mile of each other in China, your multiple supplier sourcing is not necessarily going to help. So you want to have multiple suppliers and you want to have them in strategic, diversified locations throughout the globe. The first thing you can do to build collaborative working relationships with your suppliers is hire the right people to be on your sourcing and procurement team that understand how to build relationships, how to treat people well, and how to innovate. I can tell you there are lots of organizations that we work with that have had to really pivot and shift the talent set of their procurement team over the last 3 years. So really assess and look at, do my buyers have the right personalities and skill sets for this type of position? If not, it might make sense to look at shifting up who's doing what within the organization. So having the right talent that knows how to communicate, collaborate, sell internally, and innovate is really important. And I would argue your job descriptions and your interview process are so important. You want to make supply chain cool. You want to make it fun. You want to make it hip and sexy, not what I would call a paper pushing function, where I'm getting somebody who's just pushing paper around and trying to lowball suppliers. The second thing you can do is make it really easy for suppliers to work with you. So suppliers are busy. They are often in very high demand. And if they think that interacting and working with you is going to take a lot of time or resources, one, your prices are going to go up because they're going to pass that along to you. But two, they're going to prioritize other customers that are easier to work with. So a way to do that is to really put simple processes in place and leverage software as much as possible that's easy for the suppliers to use and collaborate and to track all the changes, so they're not forced to be sending 100 emails a day and working from a spreadsheet and doing a lot of manual data entry. The third thing you can do is look at your payment terms. And you want to really assess, how are you paying your suppliers? And it may mean that you need to pay for everything up front, or you need to pay for 80% up front. But if you are wanting to pay upon shipment for all of your product, that's not going to fly now when suppliers have other organizations willing to be very flexible and pay a lot more upfront.
Do you think that's going to be the state of the union just going forward as normal, where the expectation is payment kind of upfront or 80% upfront, versus are we going back as the tide kind of turns towards normalization?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard to predict anything now. You asked me to predict what's going to happen in 3 months, and I even shy away from that. So I don't know if I can predict that far out. I will tell you it's driven by supply. If supply remains limited, you're going to need to be very flexible on your payment terms, which if you're a small mid-market manufacturer, really impacts your cash flow because you're now having to pay upfront or a significant amount of money upfront to get inventory that you may not see for 6 or 8 months. And that's money that you could have been using to innovate, to grow your business, to buy new machinery, buy more equipment. So I can't answer that, but I will say while we continue to have significant supply shortages, payment terms are not going to change.
It makes sense. That makes sense. I think, Sarah, one of the things, maybe just going back to adding additional vendors, right? Single source versus multi-source. As someone who's been in the space and has ordered things and relied on suppliers, I think one of the mindsets that people have is, I need to get the most economies of scale off of my spend. So by being with a single provider, giving them all of my volume, I'm going to get deeper discounts. And I'm probably just restating what you said, but really you can't think about that anymore. You're almost going to have to think about paying a little more upfront with multiple vendors because you're going to lose some of that economies of scale, right? You're going to lose a little bit of that volume buy, but it's better to do that than not have product at all and to take the risk and liability of there being an issue with a single source provider.
So at the beginning, you said vendor. I encourage everyone to call them suppliers, not vendors.
Great point.
Vendors is very old school. Vendors is very purchasing mindset. I would encourage you to call them suppliers. Suppliers is more collaborative and it's more of a team approach. The days of trying to save a penny here and then on price are just, in my opinion, gone. And if I were running a procurement organization, I don't even think cost would be in my top 3 focus areas. Now, of course, do you need to make sure that what you're buying is market competitive? Absolutely. But I think there are many more priorities than looking at price. And one of the main ones is supply. And if you can't get supply, no matter how much it costs, it does you no good because you're not going to have anything to manufacture. No products to sell equals no revenue.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Just touching on something else that I read during the research was 52% of POs go through change. And you just mentioned as well, right? Like stickies and notepad and Excel spreadsheets, and you got Word documents where all of these changes are captured. Like right? Is it a supplier side solution or is it a buyer side solution when we start talking about implementing more technology? So of course, the larger scaled retailers or larger scale manufacturers have ERP solutions that have purchase order management capabilities built in and EDI transactions happening. But as we look at the mid-market, is it a merchant trying to bring that in as a solution and convincing the supplier to adhere to a new tech stack? Or are we talking about the suppliers should have tech capabilities, and if you are trying to source, maybe finding a supplier that can provide a tool set from the get-go? Like, how would you advise people as they look out in the market to try and ease this pain of PO management and change management?
I by no means want this to be a pitch for SourceDay, even though I think we have an awesome product and really the only solution for mid-market in the PO change management space. But my philosophy around technology is pretty straightforward. I don't think you can buy one solution to serve all your needs as a procurement organization. An ERP solution, I think in the past, people would spend pretty significant amounts of money out of their budget, implement, and then hope that would solve every solution in every department. And it just doesn't. I think you need to have a central hub where your data is collected, where you issue purchase orders, and where your accounting and invoicing happens. So some sort of hub for all of that. But I think there's tremendous value in organizations looking at niche category solutions that solve very specific needs that integrate back into your central hub. So you have a central source of truth and data that your team can use and assess to make smarter decisions. So there are many niche procurement, freight, and logistics solutions that solve specific needs that I encourage that companies should really think about. And then again, make sure there's an integration back to that central hub. In my world, I'm now 100% in the direct spend, direct material space. So I'm working with organizations that are buying, here's my Bradley Cooper phone cover. I'm going to marry him someday. I'm obsessed and have a shrine. It's my Bradley Cooper phone cover. And if I were to, again, talk about all the parts and components that go into making this, that's what I mean by direct spend. Now, one of the challenges that companies who play in the direct spend space, and in particular are in manufacturing, distribution, retail, in the mid-market space, is they're typically cutting lots of purchase orders throughout the year, and they're buying from a pretty broad supplier base. One of those reasons is they need suppliers globally. So you've got suppliers seas and domestically. And then we've seen this trend towards companies not being comfortable relying on single sourcing. So when you're adding more suppliers, your supplier base is then growing. So when a company is issuing a purchase order, 52% of the time, our research has shown from the usage of our platform that line items change. So if I'm issuing a purchase order with 100 line items, we're saying that on average, 52 of those 100 line items are going to have changes. And that means then significant back and forth via email and spreadsheet with your supplier. And then we go back to that risk. Now, I am a big fan of solutions like ours that allow the buyer and supplier to collaborate and interact directly in the platform. So it's not a single-sided where it's only suppliers using it or only buyers, but our tool allows the buyer and the supplier to collaborate directly in real time, going back and forth on changes like price, quantity, delivery date. And then once that change is approved in the platform by the buyer, our tool then automatically pushes those changes into the ERP. So that example I gave earlier of somebody making a key entry and costing the company $70,000 would not have happened had they had automation that will collab between the buyer, supplier, and then back into the ERP, in this case, the central source of truth. So if you are a buyer and you're working at a mid-market organization, really consider looking at niche software that's collaborative, that brings all the parties together and allows them to communicate. And then the key piece is that back push of data into your central source of truth.
While you were talking, something that I started noodling over, and again, I know we are not talking about SourceDay per se, great tool, but in general, if I look at this space, maybe it's a product idea, the opportunity in the market happens to be a more sharing type of network, right? Like rather than people picking and choosing the tools, what if there's a tool that's just out there in the ether, it's open as a network that everyone can collaborate on. And then when they require, right, if you are cutting a PO, there's a per PO cost or something, and just making it more of a broader open network. That way there is higher adoption. If 30-40% of the mid-market starts using this particular product, I think the rewards are down the road, but whoever builds that just starts making a lot of sense, right? Rather than acquiring the software, the network exists and it's people just signing up onto the network and the cost is maybe per PO or some sort of monetization strategy. That's not a typical SaaS acquisition play of bringing in the software, right? And yeah, if you have integration needs, there is opportunities. Just something that I start thinking about as I think about this particular space and what could happen for the mid-market.
I think to that point and what you were just saying, Sarah, if I'm a mid-market brand and I'm using a platform like yours, are there programs, are there partnerships, are there resources that allow me to connect some of those dots? So in other words, if I'm looking for a t-shirt, if I'm looking to source t-shirts overseas and I'm using your platform, do you provide me with a list of suppliers that are already in that region and are familiar with your software? Or what does a mid-market brand do? Are there partnerships, organizations, associations that they could partner with and team to help get them started in thinking about this the right way?
Yeah, so currently we are set up where the client provides us with their supplier list, and we have a managed service solution where we help onboard and ensure that the suppliers are using the platform. So if you have 100 suppliers, you may say, okay, 20 of these suppliers are direct spend suppliers and 15 of them make up 90% of our spend. Then we would get the list of those 15 suppliers. We would onboard them, monitor, engage, support to make sure that they're continuously using the platform. We currently do not have the option for you to go in and say, okay, my supplier who's selling my screws is out of stock for 6 months. I need somebody else. Who else can I look and go into a database and say that here are 5 other alternatives in our platform? We are currently not there yet, but it's definitely something we've talked about. And we feel there may be value to our supplier base in offering something like that, because there's a lot of value in using a supplier that's already set up and onboarded with the platform versus going out and having to start the entire sourcing process over, finding a new supplier, and then getting them onboarded. So it's definitely on our radar, and it's definitely something that we've had conversations about.
One more check in that product roadmap category for that item. I think that would be pretty cool and offer a lot of value in that mid-market space. So love that you guys are thinking about it. We are months away, a few short months away from peak season, Sarah. Any thoughts, words of wisdom, anything you want to share with the audience as it pertains to seeing first mile, anything that they could do now if they haven't already done it? If it's too late, how do they start planning for 2023?
Yeah, if your POs aren't cut yet for 2022, you are in trouble. So
that's right.
So I'll answer this in a way that makes sense for brands that work with seasonal products. So we're having a lot of conversations and producing content around how companies can prepare for the holiday season. So if you're a retail or an e-commerce brand in mid-market, you probably have some seasonal product that may tie to Halloween, Thanksgiving, or Christmas. And one of the biggest challenges with that is the very short window you have to sell your product. You've got to get your parts and materials or items in. You've got to produce, rebrand, do whatever it is you're going to do with those parts or materials. And then you've got to get it out the door quickly within a very short window. And I would say one of the most important things you can do to prepare is, one, do a full assessment of your supplier base. Who are your suppliers? What is their availability? What sort of relationship do you have with those suppliers? Anything that's questionable or a red flag, I would go immediately start sourcing alternative suppliers to make sure you can have supply. The other challenge you are going to have is freight and transportation. Getting a process in place for how are you going to make sure that your product gets to your warehouse, gets to your manufacturing facility on time. Somebody may have your order, may be ready to ship it out, but they can't actually get the truck or they can't get the boat to actually transport the product. So you want to think about that. And then you'll also want to be very fluid in looking at things like data. And the challenge with this is forecasting and the data assessments that we used to do before COVID really are irrelevant now because things have changed so much. And I would argue that during the holiday season in particular, things will be changing hourly. So you just need to be prepared to constantly be looking at your data, looking at the situation. Don't go off historical. What happened in the past is not really relevant to what's happening today. So while having that number can potentially provide a benchmark, I would really suggest that you throw that out the window. And then the whole customer experience process is so important. If you have supply chain challenges, have a way to communicate that to your customer. I love humor, so I would write funny emails. I would have my teammates make videos of them talking about what happened in the supply chain, make light of it. If I am expecting something to arrive on Friday and it arrives 2 weeks late and I'm not notified, I'm super annoyed. And depending on what it is, it may have been a large delivery where I had rescheduled my work to make sure I'm home during a certain window. But if 3 days before or a week before or a month before, however much notice you have, somebody tells me, hey, Sarah, your couch is going to be delayed 6 weeks and here's why. And if I get an email and a video of somebody talking to me, I'm going to be much more open. I'm still going to be upset and annoyed, but I'm going to be much more open to that change because I've had time to prepare and I was given a heads up. I just moved in the last 2 weeks from an apartment, which was right by the office, into a house, which is still very close, but not next door. And I cannot tell you how many supply chain challenges I have had with literally everything. This computer that I'm doing our podcast from, my MacBook Pro, was delayed 4 months.
Wow.
My couch, my dining room table chairs, my dining room table, all were supposed to be on time. I confirmed availability. I confirmed stock, had everything scheduled. And now 2 weeks later, I'm living in a semi-empty house with taking photos of me sitting on the floor around blue tape where my couch is supposed to be. And then on top of that, I'm getting deliveries where parts are missing. So I get my chair, and my handyman's there assembling, and he can't because there's a major part missing. Again, I'm sharing this because in none of my experiences would I say that a company did a good job of communicating with me about that change. If someone had, they really would have stood out. So even though you're in supply chain, in procurement, and you're a buyer, you can have an impact on that customer experience. And the worst thing that can happen for your brand is negative reviews. So people get online, start giving reviews. I'm more likely to spend the time to give a bad review than a good one. And I know that sounds wrong, but I have a great experience. It just happens, and it is, and I appreciate it. But if I have a really crappy experience and I just think this is so frustrating, I'm actually going to take the time to go on and write a review. Bad reviews can significantly impact your sales for a holiday season. If customers are looking to make a quick one-off purchase, they go on and the first 3 things they see are negative reviews. You better believe they're going to go to your competitor and they're not coming back.
Very true. I'll just close out by saying, bad reviews are a thing. It has a significant impact on a business. I have a few other businesses, and I got to say, you got to manage that customer expectation, or else your business is going to get impacted. That's a really good point that you make, and it's about the customer experience. So thank you.
Yeah, and massive amount of value and insight, Sarah. And for those who aren't following Sarah, she does an awesome job communicating these on social media. Your LinkedIn page is filled with these awesome nuggets. I saw your post about the laptop, about the chair, you sitting very sad in your office with a disassembled chair. I love what you're actually doing from a social standpoint. So maybe as we close here, I just want to thank you. And I also want to give you an opportunity to share where does someone follow you? Where can they learn more? I know you're involved in a lot of different things. You have a couple podcasts. So I want to give you the opportunity to really share how people could follow you, where they could seek more information and connect with you.
Yeah, so the best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. You can find me at Sarah Scudder Manufacturing Maven is my full name on LinkedIn. And I'm on the platform all day, every day, 7 days a week. So I'm a little bit of a LinkedIn addict. Love posting supply chain content, love being funny and quirky. So follow me, connect with me there. 2 hashtags that I've created are Women in ERP and Manufacturing Maven. So feel free to also follow those hashtags. I'm also very active on Twitter at Scudder. So at SCUDER. And I am just launching a direct spend podcast called What the Duck, another supply chain podcast. And it'll be launching in a couple weeks. We'll be releasing at least one episode a week, and I will be interviewing people who are in all facets and aspects of direct spend, direct materials procurement.
Amazing.
You got a couple subscribers right here.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to maximize your supply chain. Available on all major podcasting channels. Thank you for listening and see you in the next episode.